Masterclass for members of the executive heads of departments and senior leaders from the local government sphere, the legislative sector and organs of state, where President Ramaphosa is expected to deliver a keynote presentation.
Citizen engagement and making sure that this isn't just a top-down mission, but really bringing different voices to the table. And at the time of the moon landing, there was, of course, Jill Scott Heron, who on his famous poem and song, Whitey's on the Moon, really raised this issue of why are we going to the moon when we have all these problems on Earth? Dick Nelson, a colleague of mine, wrote a book back in 1977, The Moon in the Ghetto. Why have we managed to do that and we can't even solve the concrete problems on Earth? Structural racism, structural inequality, and so on. And I do think there's something about the recent decade that we've had, or even fewer, right? It's about 3 years, that we've had a global discussion around Black Lives Matter, around Fridays for the Future, so children striking on Fridays because they care about climate, the Me Too movement, and so on. There is an opportunity to really bring social movements also to the table here. We shouldn't forget, by the way, that without labor unions, we wouldn't have some of the best innovations ever. The weekend, the 8-hour workday, children not working in factories. These social innovations, which formed the kind of market outcomes we have today, came about when we actually had, again, I don't want to say partnership because it wasn't harmonious, but when we allowed processes of economic growth also to interact with steering that growth to be, again, more inclusive, but also listening, right? Even in World War II, that transformation of automobile production to wartime production would not have happened without labor unions actually helping to foster and negotiate that process. So whether it's the green movement, the labor movement, women's movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, this is an opportunity today to bring those voices to the table, to design the projects themselves, not just to react to them, to be more just, but for the project design, the planning phase. And Sweden is an interesting example because they have at a very high level a challenge of a fossil-free welfare state. They've landed it on everything government does. And again, I think this is something really interesting for many of the ministers in the room. They've landed it also in areas like public education. What does it mean to have school meals that are healthy, tasty, and sustainable? So the whole value chain of school meal production becomes a lever. In that way, I was saying procurement can become a lever for fostering carbon neutrality and bringing school children and students to the table through also their curriculum learning around carbon neutrality and sustainability and global warming, but also literally to the table of designing those meals. They also have this interesting street mission. They have 40,000 kilometers of streets, and they're trying to take this place-based approach of a 1-minute street where all the key things you need are close by, but again, bringing citizens and local policymakers and businesses like Volvo or Voice Scooters to the table to think about that sustainable street mission together. In Camden, where I live, outside of my window here, it's a part of London, we've been working very closely with Georgia Gould and the Camden Council on really local missions, including ones that have to do with youth crime, but also carbon neutrality seen at the locus of the housing estates themselves, and bringing housing associations, residents, and citizen assemblies as part of that process of co-creation. But also, again, coming back to this issue of food, what does it mean to have, for example, a goal of by 2030, everyone has 3 nutritious, affordable, and sustainable meals a day, in looking at this through an industrial strategy lens. So really, we're bringing the welfare state and the innovation state together, because too often these are in different rooms. Lastly, just because I know the criticism that often comes, let's not go back to ideology, please, right? None of what I'm talking about is is just putting in a lot of public money from helicopters. No, it's about building smarter state, even with existing money. In many cases, we do need more money, especially around areas like healthcare, but it really is about that redesign challenge with which I know that the president, the principal, and the minister all believe in. It's not about picking winners. It's not a big HS2 project. It's not about the Concorde. It's about transformation, choosing challenges, turning the challenges into missions, and having a portfolio approach, which is intersectoral and that bottom-up projects, right? And it really does mean picking the willing, transforming at the design level our tools to do so. And it's not about ideology. This is not about, socialism, capitalism. It's very much about solving problems together, and there's many of them. But it's also, I dare say, to govern that process in the name of, citizenry, to make sure people benefit. That itself has to be at the co-design phase. We've worked very closely. I'm actually now going to be chairing a council for the World Health Organization called the Economics of Health for All. And, how we govern vaccine production to make sure that the patents are not used for value extraction, a term I talked about in the beginning, how we govern partnerships between the Pfizers and the governments of the world to really fuel collective intelligence so that, as much knowledge sharing occurs, but also that we don't have what Dr. Tedros called vaccine apartheid, in terms of the hoarding of dosages in some countries. This means that how we govern these processes really, really matter. It's not just the vaccine, but how the vaccine is governed. And the COVID moment also presents us with this really interesting opportunity, and I really welcome you in South Africa to take it on, which is to create more conditionality, both between the public and the private sector, but also public and public. In Europe right now, the Next Gen EU plan will be a European recovery that goes to member states conditional on the member states having a strategy and a plan for climate and the digital divide. And in some countries, this here is the Minister of Finance in France, who you see, they have also created conditionality. So sectors like automobiles and airlines were only able to access the recovery funds if they were willing and committed to reducing their carbon emissions. In Scotland, in Denmark and Austria, the conditions were, you've got to pay your tax. Any company that is abusing its power by using tax havens, can't access the recovery funds. And I think we need to frame this not as conditionality, because that reminds us of kind of Washington consensus kinds of words, but really building back better, having a new social contract, and having conditionalities, in terms of public-private, public-public is I think really interesting in South Africa, especially because the state also owns, for example, different types of state-owned enterprises. But what does it mean to have a relationship with state-owned enterprises, which aren't necessarily just about ownership of stuff, but a process through transforming those sectors is embedded within the relationship itself, which also comes to the point of budgeting. How can a budget, in that NASA kind of way, be catalytic in terms of transformation instead of just hands out subsidies, guarantees? And again, I can tell you that in Italy, a lot of the problems we have is not so much a small state, but a state that was just a handout machine. And very different, by the way, from what's happened recently in Germany, where its own public bank, for example, lent to the steel sector in Germany, conditional on steel committing to lowering its material content, which it did through repurpose, reuse, recycle. It is today one of the most innovative steel sectors, not because it went to Davos, but the condition to access the bailout from the government was that it had to transform. Let me just finish here, because I do want to stop. And just to say, I think there's a real opportunity in South Africa to take on this mission-oriented approach. It requires purpose-driven, public value-driven government organizations, but also rethinking our industrial strategy, procurement programs, really to contain this kind of design element of not just conditionality, but really what does it mean to look hard and fast at the structures on the ground and admit that the problems we have, and of course there are problems, are not just about accusing the bureaucracy or accusing about corruption, but it requires a massive shift in both mindset, but working on concrete areas like Sweden's example with the school meals. We really believe that take an area, learn from it on what it means to partner with business in a different way, learn from redesigning that procurement contract in a different way, learning by doing, welcoming that risk-taking, and then scale up that learning. And that's why we talk about practice-based learning very much within the Institute, but it does mean rethinking those basic concepts of value, markets, organizations, pre-distribution, getting the conditions right from the start, not just redistribution, partnership with a purpose, stakeholder value at the center. This is my last slide in the Institute. This is on our website. It means talking about policy in a fundamentally different way, not about fixing, but co-creating, not about de-risking, but real collective risk-taking and welcoming uncertainty, and then sharing the rewards as well. Not picking winners, picking the willing, not leveling, but tilting, and so on and so forth. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, to also work with your team. And we are excited by the prospect of continuing our collaboration. Oh dear, where am I going? How do I stop sharing? It's not coming up.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Prof. Thank you very much for that insightful inputs. Let me request the Honorable President, who is here as a student of the National School of Government today, to make his intervention and reflections on your presentation, Prof. Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Busani. Principal. It's wonderful to call you principal. It's a wonderful term. And you are really acting as a principal. Let me thank you, Busani, and indeed Minister Mkhunu, for organizing this masterclass. I do indeed feel like a real student today, and let me immediately say to Mariana that I enjoy being your student. I read your books, I read your articles, either in the Financial Times or wherever you post them. I am always hungry to grab as much knowledge from what you put out, what you write. And even your latest book, I'm plowing through it. And I must say that as a student, I rather enjoyed your lecture, and I've gained a lot of insights, and I'd like to reflect on some of the issues. But I'd also like to thank your other colleagues who have joined you in this class, but also some of the colleagues who have jointly written the recent paper that you have done that reflects on South Africa. And I'm rather glad that extracting out of your book, Mission Economy, you've focused on South Africa and the lessons that we can learn. The value that you add, Mariana, both in our Presidential Economic Advisory Council, as well as your participation with us in a class like this, but also in my interaction with you on an ongoing basis, either on Zoom or telephonically, is that you offer us a global perspective on a number of issues, and certainly in as far as how we should continue navigating our way around a number of challenges that we face. And your talk and your lecture today is pivoted largely around the challenges that we face, but the beauty about your intervention is that you place it against a much broader canvas. You paint us a wonderful South African picture, but it is placed against a global background, a global canvas, where we are able to see our own country against what other countries are doing and the lessons that we should draw. So that I find very refreshing. But the other part is that quite a number of things that you put forward are practical. They are bereft of myths and ideologies, and you actually challenge myths that exist out there, and you get us to think outside the box, and you get us to look at how we can solve problems, and that is how practical your approach is. But what I enjoy most, and which emanated from your book, which continues to be a thread through quite a number of things that you say and put out to us, is how we can become an entrepreneurial state. Entrepreneurial meaning that how we can be creative, we can be innovative, we can be bold, we can be enterprising, how we can take risks as a state, but you go beyond that, and also how the private sector in our country can also take risks. and you are very critical, and I'll come to that in a minute about the private sector, not only in South Africa but globally, how they tend to focus more on finance and not on areas of investment that can create jobs and move economies forward. And you highlight, which is where I think your approach is most beneficial, on public interest and public value, because sometimes we don't tend to focus on that. Now, clearly, as you correctly say, the COVID moment has brought about a great moment for many countries in the world, much as some are weak and all that, states. But it's also highlighted, as Minister Mkhunu was saying earlier, the important role that is played by government, or should be played by government. It was interesting for me some time ago to read how the Financial Times, which is much more of a capitalist-oriented publication, which is quite influential globally, was actually saying the role of the state has now come center stage. And not only because we are having to manage our way around dealing with COVID, but also because what we have to do as states should go beyond COVID. We should be looking at how our economies can be more inclusive, how we can resolve the problems that have been exacerbated by COVID, the inequalities, the poverty, the degradation in our environment and all that. So the role of government has been brought to the fore. And certainly we have found that in our own country, the role of government has been brought center stage. And as it so happens, many of our citizens look forward to government playing that key role in their own personal lives, in giving direction to the economy, in dealing with COVID, and in redressing the inequities of the past, and how to deal with what apartheid misrule in our country has wrought or has brought about the devastation that continues to affect our people's lives. So, role of government is therefore very important. And what this means is that it needs a capable state. The state has to be capable, as your talk has actually focused on that. The capabilities of the state are important, and so we need a capable state. Now, in dealing with the realities of our own situation, as Minister Mkhunu also referred to, a matter which you have become well informed about and well rooted in is not only what apartheid did, but also the challenges that we have had to face through state capture and corruption, because that state capability that we sorely need, even at this time, has been weakened by state capture, and we see it. We don't even need to explain it in so many words, and we see it. And you also touch on an important issue in your talk about how states, in addressing some problems in a number of countries, often resort to outside help, quickly resort to outsourcing, to consultants. When there's a problem and a challenge, they quickly run to people who are outside, meaning that state capabilities has been weakened. And that happens to be the case here as well. And we've seen how outsourcing has also weakened our state, and how even those entities that we tended to outsource to were themselves captured, were themselves deeply involved in the challenges that we had to face of corruption. But what corruption also did is it just destroyed our ability to get things done. Because through that, the financial capability was weakened, there was overpricing, the skills that we had within the state started migrating outside of the state and then acting as consultants in, and therefore that accountability and the discipline that is needed immediately just goes down, and there is a loss of focus. And the focus is then around just how we manage contracts. So in a way, in some areas of the state, we became contract managers, just managing contracts and also managing tenders, dishing out tenders. And may I say, in some ways, the drive was more about another objective that we sought to address, which is empowering empowering black entrepreneurs so that black entrepreneurs can also do business with government, and nothing wrong with that. And in the main, they've been good, but in the course of weakening that state, we also tended to destroy those entrepreneurs by not paying them on time, because that state capability that was weakened, and as we empowered black entrepreneurs, either women-led or black-led, youth-led businesses, because that capability within the operations of the state had been weakened. We didn't pay them on time. Their businesses got destroyed, and therefore we then lost purpose. The purpose-driven that approach that you were talking about got diluted. And it is this that we now have to address, which we are addressing, because we've become so acutely aware of it. And your presence amongst us helps us to understand better precisely what has happened to us and what we have to, how we have to navigate our way through all that. And you mentioned a very important area, which is policy redesign. We've got to redesign policy. We've got to approach what government does in a different way. We've got to bring state capability back into the state, attract talent. And that is why the drive now is to bring more qualified people into government. And people should not just be brought into government because they know so-and-so, they are well connected with so-and-so. And the beauty of this, Mariana, is that redesign process is also starting at the governing party. The governing party is now focusing on ensuring that we get more skilled people, not just people who know others. More skilled people to be brought in, either at local government level, right throughout. So we bring in more skilled, and then we want to focus more on professionalizing the public service. Because as we professionalize our public service more and bring in well-qualified young people, we are then able to refocus the state. And that issue you talk about purpose-driven then becomes a reality. And it is this redesign that we're now focusing on. And part of that, and we've got snippets of it all over, part of that is also precisely what Busani Ngaweni is doing and Minister Mkhunu is doing with the School of Government. The School of Government has just come alive. It is the first time that a president of the Republic participates in a masterclass like this and be a student in a public way. And they have brought the School of Government alive. Many public servants are now participating in formations or interventions, manifestations rather like this, and participating, going to classes. And through that, we're beginning to redesign not only policy, but also the way that we work. And the other way which focuses also on what you have said, and your harping on this is so spot on. Getting rid of the silo mentality. You talked about Apollo 1, when there was that fire that killed those three astronauts. Let me tell you, after a 10-hour long work day, 2 days ago, I said to my wife, I want to watch a movie tonight. And I got her to sit down with me, and we watched Apollo 13. We watched Apollo 13, which also talks quite a lot about what you were talking about, the mission to the moon. I watched that and I said, that's precisely what we also need to focus on, because through Apollo 13, the whole Apollo program, the US government and NASA were able to destroy silos. They got everybody to work together, and that way they were able to finally put a man on the moon. And we are seeking to destroy the silos in government, and we are working fervently. And this idea, as I became president, I realized that one of the things that we needed to do was to reform the way government functions, because we tended to be in silos at national government level, provincial and local. And I was quite driven in saying to my colleagues, let us reform the way we work and let us get rid of the silo mentality. And we then adopted or fashioned the district development model, which had been in practice in a number of areas, but we now repositioned it and reformed it into what it is today. So through the district development model, we are breaking down silo mentality. We're ensuring that government will have one plan, one single plan that runs from national, provincial, local, district, as well as the local area. And what you have said today just reinforces that. Now, the other problem, of course, that we have to deal with is the financialization of our economy. You're absolutely right. Our economy, and I guess it's not this South African economy only, has been so financialized. We're no longer investing in the productive side of the economy. We're not focusing on industrialization, on manufacturing. We're just focusing on the financial sector, and it's been growing by leaps and bounds. The profits that our financial sector has been making has just been huge profits, billions and billions. And quite a lot of that money is just in certain assets and not in assets that we would like to see producing jobs. Now, our financial sector is highly monopolized, as you might well know. Other countries will have, 10s and 20 banks and all that. We only have 4 major banks, and between them, money just rotates and all that. And yet, we should be opening up the financial sector more and more. And we need to focus on that. The disappointment for me has been in how our financial sector has managed the COVID guarantee fund that we put up, which was guaranteed by government. We put out 200 billion and said, assist the private sector, let's protect the jobs so that companies are able to operate through COVID, and through that we should also restructure our economy, bring more black people who've been prevented from operating in their own economy. And that has not really happened. And that, to me, is greatly disappointing. And the one other area that is disappointing is that the financial sector is supposed to be the most creative. The clever guys, the clever girls and guys are supposed to be in the financial sector, and they're not coming up with innovative ideas that are going to help pump money into the economy. But on the reindustrialization side, we're making strides. We came up with the idea of having master plans for each sector of the economy, so we're beginning to focus on that. Without hogging this space forever, what we also need to reform is our procurement system. Our procurement system is archaic. And as you correctly say, procurement in any state, in any government, is one of the biggest areas of economic activity. And we have to reform it, but we have to reform it in a way that is going to be empowering to black entrepreneurs, to black people, so that they can have a sense that they can play a role in the procurement. But we also need to transform it so that it is free of corruption. And in the end, you're absolutely right, we need to build back better. We need to build a more inclusive economy, but an economy that is also people-centered. And we need to be engaging our people in their various formations and the economic growth that we need to engender. And in doing so, we need to engage and involve our people in an overarching way. But we also need to build, as you say, durable partnerships, partnerships with a purpose, with the private sector, with the social sector, with labor, to address precisely the issues that Minister Mkhunu was talking about. And our DNA as a nation is about collaboration, is about working together, about building partnerships. And it is this that you have stressed today, that we need more citizen engagement. We need citizen engagement, as I conclude, on issues such as budgeting. We crafted a budget, and it's dawned on me that in crafting this budget, we do need the citizenry to understand the structure of our budget, so that it's not only the Minister of Finance who stands in Parliament, delivers the budget, and is the only one who understands it. We need to engage the citizenry, our people, to understand both sides of the budget, both the revenue side and the expenditure side. And also get to understand that at times we do need to make choices. You focus also on making the choices. I have a beautiful quote that you've got in your article, and I want to end with it, where you say, crisis can act as critical junctures and be a spur for long-term social and economic change. And this is what this moment, the COVID crisis, has presented us as South Africans. And this is a time when all of us need to be working together, not pulling asunder, pulling in the same direction and utilizing this crisis so that we are able to achieve the goals that we need to achieve. The 17 SDGs, as well as the goals that we set up in our own National Development Plan, stand out there for us, not only for government to achieve, but for all of us as South Africans to work together to achieve those goals. So Mariana, as your student today, I hope you don't ask me to write an exam or a test after this. As your student today, I really, multiple choice. I really value this opportunity and want to thank Musani and Minister Mkhunu for making this opportunity available. So I'm enormously enriched by what you had to say to us this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those insightful, reflections. We will have you, close in the next few minutes. We've got a question from Minister Dilli.
All right, President Ramaphosa there speaking at the National School of Government Masterclass. We're going to go for a break, of course, and have more news for you at the top of the hour with my colleague Nzinga Kunta.